Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Eye on Africa. My name is Awasar. I'm Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at the Africa Studies Center, Michigan State University. Eye on Africa is our weekly speaker series. Our guest today is Dr. Randy Goldson. Dr. Goldson graduated with a PhD in religion from Temple University in 2020. His dissertation, entitled "The Jah in the Flesh, Spirit, Power, and Divine Embezzlement in Rastafari," examined the Rastafari conception of the divine as an indwelling being within the body of each Rasta, thereby imbuing them with power and agency. Dr. Goldson has published articles in the area of Rastafari epistemology. He recently taught as an adjunct assistant professor at Temple University and Maryland Institute College of Arts. He is currently working on his Juris Doctor degree at Temple University Beasley School of Law, where he is a Beasley Scholar. And Dr. Goldson's talk is entitled today, "Becoming Members of a New Race, Ethical Maroonage, Repatriation, and Africa in Rastafari Sovereign Consciousness." Thank you so very much for accepting our invitation. We're glad to have you. I pass it to you now.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Sar, for the introduction and for the invitation to participate in this forum virtually at Michigan State University. I'm extremely delighted to share a little bit of my thoughts and just some of the things that have been going through my mind on this matter of our embrace of Africa, this whole concept of Maroonage, and what we can learn from the Rastafari community about our engagement as Africans in the diaspora with Africa. Now, just before I get into the presentation, I just want to point out the use of the term Africans in America or Africans in the diaspora. You know, last year, a group of us came together to do a book study, and it has really evolved into a movement at this point. And one of the books we read on the sovereign psyche really challenged us to think about the use of terms and how we assert our African agency by not necessarily truncating our identity, such as to say I'm Afro-Jamaican as opposed to say I'm an African in Jamaica. And I think that's a powerful move. And I'm going forward, I have adopted that, and I'll continue to emphasize that to kind of you know, underscore and ground African being and identity. So I'm going to go ahead and share a PowerPoint as we work through the topic together. So the four objectives of this talk are: one, I want to briefly discuss the setting within which Rastafari emerged. I know Rastafari is not necessarily a religion or a movement or a spiritual system that people are with which people are easily familiar. Most people might know Bob Marley as the most famous Rastaman, but there's much more. And to really understand the concept of African, of Rastafari, sovereign consciousness and how Africa is situated in that, we need to look at the history of the Caribbean, the history of Jamaica. And I'll do my best to summarize 400 years of history in like a few minutes. And then I want to look more specifically at Rastafari engagement with Africa on two levels, mostly on the religious, spiritual, and philosophical level. And we're using the term grounding here, which is Rastafari way of reasoning out things. It's a grounding, reasoning out. And then we'll look at the political organizing and social activism of Rastafari and those kinds of engagement. And then we'll zero in on this idea of repatriation as a core organizing principle for Rastafari engagement with Africa. And I want to propose this theory of ethical Maroonage. And I'll say more about Maroonage largely as a historical process or a historical event, and more so as a process and theory, and how I think Rastafari engagement with Africa, exemplifies that theory or follow that theoretical model, and ask ourselves, what are the prospects, what are the possibility for our engagement with the continent? So let's start somewhat at the beginning. So the immediate impacts of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in the Americas included physical displacement of Africans, separation from their homeland and family, and their bondage on the plantation throughout the region. On arrival in the West Indies, South America, and continental United States, Africans underwent an insidious type of transmutative kind of process, at least from the perspective or through the eyes of the slaveholding class, whereby Africans were no longer humans, but chattel. The enslavers viewed Africans as property, and from their exploited labor enriched themselves and their European motherlands. Now, for me, it is beyond dispute, at least in serious academic circles, that through the commodification of African bodies on the plantations, Europe and America entered the period of industrialization. I know that history is very much contested right now in this moment. And as different groups try to say they're challenging critical race theory, which is in a way trying to erase or rewrite history, a point like this might seem controversial or political, but it really should not be. I mean, as early as 1944, Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery really showed in great details this link, this proposition that slavery, enslavement in the Caribbean prompted the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and particularly England's development. More recent studies by Edward Baptiste, The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism, really picks up on that point. Although I opened this presentation with a very brief discussion of the material impact of slavery on Africans in the Americas, there is still a longer lasting impact of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. The act of European enslaving Africans in the Americas was a process of de-ontologization. Indeed, an undoing of African being, presence, psyche. It is rendering the African soulless, formless, humanless. It is an erasure of their reality, identity, and sovereignty. Thinking along with Cedric Robinson, European enslavement of Africans was the fracturing of what he calls our ontological totality. And of course, Robinson's proposition in Black Marxism is that all these acts of resistance or revolt, rebellion, is an engagement with keeping intact this ontological totality. Of course, Africans in the Americas resisted through the preservation of their language, spirituality, customs, and their memory of homeland, and their assertion of agency through warfare and, yes, flight to freedom. And I'll say much more about flight to freedom. However, with the passage of time and their inability to return home, African existence in the Americas became hybridized and creolized. In the context of the West Indies and the cultural imperialism within the post-emancipation society, Africans in the West Indies became more British than the British. And that's a phrase that's usually marshaled to describe the extent to which Africans in the West Indies pledged loyalty, fidelity to England to the expense of turning toward or affirming their African identity. So in becoming more British than the British, we're talking about the allegiance to the Union Jack, fidelity to the British monarchy, and an overall embrace of what two historians, Michelle Johnson and Brian Moore, describe as the cultus Britannica, the cultus Britannica. This is a whole structuring and socializing atmosphere through various institutions, school and church, customs and morals, making British out of the African person in the West Indies. Now, Rastafari emerged within and challenged this colonized and colonizing context, this colonized and colonizing context. Situated between Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement, that's the 1920s, 1930s, and the 1938 labor riots, oriented by the Afro-centered worldview of revivalism, and we could also throw to an extent Ethiopianism there, and fortified by the history of Black uprisings in Jamaica, and most notably, we'll have the Sam Sharp-led rebellion in 1831-32, which is sometimes called the Christmas Rebellion, and the Paul Bogle-led Morant Bay Rebellion, and I think I made a mistake here. I have 1965, which is totally wrong. Let's put 1865 here. The Rastafari pioneers punctuated the colonial space with their message. A content analysis of Leonard Percival Howells, who is the founding Rastafari, or the pioneer in Rastaman, a content analysis of his preaching and teaching revealed the following fundamental themes. And this is a picture of Howell, and here is kind of a table summarizing the main themes in his preaching from the period 1933 to 1940. And this content analysis is really looking at newspaper reports, police reports, because Howell and the early Rastas were heavily surveilled, kind of looking at his publication, The Promise Key. And so these are the main themes. Rastafari is king, and Rastafari here refers to Emperor Haile Selassie I. He's God. Ethiopia is a rightful home of Black people. Black people are Ethiopians, are Africans. Then moves on to talk about the government of Jamaica is illegitimate. King George is not the Black people's king. And of course, during this period, Jamaica was still a colony of Great Britain. The church or Christianity is evil, fraud. Judgment will come upon the government of Jamaica, the British, white people and their institutions, and then there's a string of biblical allusion and references. All right, so that's kind of the main themes that emerged in the early Rastafari message. So Rastafari is king, Rastafari is God, Africa is the ancestral and spiritual home of Black people are Africans. Now, Howell's message and that of Rastafari was a clear call away from Europe and European values to an embrace of African values. Now, while this message sounds reasonable to most of us today, the colonial society viewed the message as seditious, devilish, blasphemous, and its proponents as dangerous, lawless, and deranged. At least one point, just in 1937, 1938, who would become Prime Minister of Jamaica, Alexander Bustamante, once described pioneering Rasta Howell as one of the most dangerous men in Jamaica, Now, the colonial establishment considered the call to embrace African identity as a threat. Howell's message in its simplest form focused on a Black God, a Black king, and a Black Zion. Now, one of the reports about Howell in the 1930s, at least that first meeting reported in December 16, 1933, was that he was selling the postcard of Haile Selassie. So this picture is actually from the London Illustrated Times, and it's actually a beautiful picture in color. And so Howell obviously got hold of that newspaper, cut the picture out, pasted it on this card, and published it and reproduced it and sold it to the people who gathered at that meeting in 1933. And it was quite a bit. It was about 300, the Gleaner, the colonial voice, then at Jamaica, estimated 300 people. So here's an excerpt just to get a taste of Howell's message. It focused on a Black God, Black King, Black Zion. Here's an excerpt from a police constable's report. It says, this is what he placed on Howell's, his description of what Howell was saying. The Lion of Judah has broken the chain, and we of the Black race are now free. George V has sent his third son down to Africa in 1928 to bow down to our new king Rastafari. Rastafari is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The Black people must not look to George V as their king anymore. Rastafari is their king. The Negro is now free, and the white people will have to bow to the Negro race. So here you're seeing early elements of what is known as Black Supremacy in Howell's discourse. And again, this is not just the opposite of white supremacy. It's not. This is actually a strategy of resistance to reclaim Black identity. And so sometimes we like to talk about that kind of move as Black redemption. And I'll say a little bit more about Black redemption in a minute. So again, this is the central, the kernel of Howell's preaching of Rastafari's early message: Black God, Black King, Black Zion. So let's move on now as from that kind of historical context and early messaging about Rastafari and Africa in this message. Africa is central because the African deity, there's an African deity. Emperor Selassie I is an African deity. So let's talk now about Rastafari engagement with Africa. And again, we'll talk about it on the religious, spiritual, philosophical level, and then the political and social level. So I approach this section from the viewpoint that a restoration of Africa in the minds of Africans in the diaspora is not only important to understanding history, but ultimately restoring our sovereignty and our African identity. To echo the words of the poet and prophet, or people like to say the musician, but for me, he's a poet and a prophet, Bob Marley. We have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. That's what it's about. So we'll start with Africa in Rastafari, religious, spiritual, and philosophical grounding. From the brief introduction to the message of Rastafari pioneer Leonard Howell, African identity are central. Over the years, Rastafari has deepened our understanding of Africa in at least 4 fundamental ways. 1, by declaring Haile Selassie as God in the flesh, Rastafari offered a critique of Eurocentric religiosity that negated Blackness of God and elevated an anglicized image of the deity. Talk about a white Jesus. This declaration provides a theological scaffolding for the identity of Blackness and Africanness. Framed against the colonial history that associated Black with evil and propagandized Africa as dark, backward, and uncivilized, Rastafari's deification of the Ethiopian monarch serves as a corrective to these debasing views. Here, it is important to note the significance of Haile Selassie's heritage, coronation, and his projection on the international scene. Haile Selassie, known as Rastafari Makonnen pre-coronation, traced his lineage back to King Solomon and Queen Makeda, or the Queen of Sheba. Taken at face value, Selassie became the 225th Solomonic emperor in an uninterrupted line of descendants from Menelik I. Selassie's Solomonic heritage shows anciency, an African with history and heritage long before European civilization. Of course, there's some debate about Selassie's blackness and even critique from Marcus Garvey that Selassie, embraced his Semitic descent more than his blackness. Now, Garvey's critique or criticism of Selassie must be taken in context. Garvey was really upset with him for two reasons. One, a letter that Garvey addressed to him came back unread, and so Garvey was pretty mad about that. And two, Garvey thought that it was his weakness or his, kind of embrace of white institutions that led to Italy invading Ethiopia. So Garvey blamed him for fascist Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. So that's kind of the context where he kind of threw this out. So we have to take that criticism in context. For Rastas, however, Selassie's blackness is a given because he was an African. Selassie's deification also functioned as an entryway to African traditional cosmology. What do I mean by that? Now, you might ask, how is it possible that a human being could be deified, could be elevated? Well, that has to be situated in a larger cosmology where Africans ascended to the level of being ancestors. Of course, upon death, that transition happens. But that kind of sets up the possibility for one who is alive to make that transition into the pantheon of African gods or deities. Now, Selassie's coronation cemented the Rastafari belief in his divinity. Rastas considered the coronation event on November 2, 1930, which was recently celebrated earlier this week, as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And two texts that they point to from the Bible, Genesis 49:10, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nation shall be his. And this is taken as a reference to Haile Selassie, who is descendant of David, coming out of that Davidic line through the Solomonic heritage. Revelation 5:5, and one of the elders said unto the prophet John, weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book and loose the seven seals thereof. Selassie took the title King of Kings, conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah upon his coronation. And so that actually served to serve as evidence of his fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Selassie, moreover, several world leaders gathered in Addis Ababa to pay homage and celebrate his enthronement. It is significant to note that up to that point, Selassie's coronation in 1930 was the most widely covered in terms of the international media, in terms of print, in terms of video. At least there are 4 or 5 hours of footage that's available from different media houses that went. And of course, the attraction was one, Selassie sent letters to all the dignitaries to come. Also because of the different ambassadors who came, their media houses came. The National Geographic magazine dedicated 70-something pages, photographic pages, to the coronation. So you have pretty much good pictures, beautifully colored pictures of the coronation and Ethiopia. So number 2, not only did Rastas deify the Ethiopian monarch, but Ethiopia specifically and Africa generally gained spiritual significance. Rastas point to Ethiopia's ancient history as evidence of its importance, Ethiopia's role as the cradle of civilization and the center of learning surpassed that of Europe. Rastas marshal African history to affirm that European knowledge is stolen African knowledge. So that's a common trope that you'll hear in Rastafari circles. They'll tell you that the Greek philosophers frequented Ethiopia to learn spirituality and philosophy. And of course, evidence of this, you look back to the history of Christianity and kind of that Alexandria going all the way down to Ethiopia as kind of important Christian centers. More generally, Rastafari combated the negative characterization of Africa by pointing to African invention, vast knowledge, and their peaceful way of life, customs, tradition. The fact that Emperor Menelik successfully repelled the Ethiopian forces in 1895 during the Battle of Adwa underscored for Rastas the nation's superior military tactics and served as a point of pride that Ethiopia was never colonized. It was never colonized. Of course, there was Italian occupation from 1935-1936, which forced His Imperial Majesty to seek exile in England. Yet this brief period of Italian occupation is really considered a defeat because it precipitated the Second World War, serving as a rebuke to the League of Nations for allowing fascism to fester and having refused to help Ethiopia when Italy invaded. Rastas shifting again of Zion from Jerusalem to Ethiopia is not simply the creation of a Black Zion or a Black version of Zion. It is a necessary important part of Rastafari philosophy of Black redemption, which goes back to this thing of Ethiopianism. Psalm 68:31, Ethiopia shall soon stretch forth her hand unto God. So number three, we're talking about the four ways that, Rastafari has helped us, fundamental ways Rastafari has helped us to understand Africa and the role of Africa. So number three, Black redemption is about the value of African and Africa. It is a restoration of Blackness, both in terms of identity and sovereignty. Part of this message is that Rastafari brought to bear on the neo-colonized psyche of the masses is that Black people are Africans. Black people are Africans. And that Black is beautiful. Now, again, you have to take this within the context of a post-colonial society and the context of a society that was thoroughly shaped by colonialism, where whiteness was elevated, white identity was seen, all things white seen as more beautiful, more important. That Rastafari present this simple message that really cut at the heart of these falsehoods. Black is beautiful. Black people are Africans. Nation-state formation as a vestige of colonialism reified insular thinking such that the people of the West Indies thought of themselves as exclusively Jamaican, Antiguan, Trinidadian, whatever nationality. Even though the racial hierarchies and boundaries reminded them of their Blackness or Africanness, these reminders seldom trigger a race consciousness that turned them toward Africa. In fact, as Walter Rodney described, the project of multiculturalism and multiracialism in the Caribbean gave a false sense of belonging and equality. Take the Jamaican motto, for example, which is out of many, one people. Out of many, one people. So that itself is a project of multiculturalism. We're all one, we're different heritage, different racial identities, but we're one as Jamaicans. Rastas challenged that status quo. And it's not enough, the Rastaman argued, to reduce African ancestry to performatives. Mental and spiritual embrace is required. Finally, by making the claim that God is within us, and this is a big claim now, Rastas further elevated the dignity and sovereignty of Black people. The concept of the I and I carries ontological, epistemological, and spiritual significance. I and I is a universal link between Jah, Rastafari, God, and the people of Jah, but it's also even more expansive in terms of a link of humanity with creation, the rest of creation. Because Jah now lives within, the African body becomes infused with self-determining power. This is a basis of one's sovereignty. It gives rise to insights and knowledge, seeing the world for what it is and knowing one's place within it. And that's what Rastafari will always emphasize with the I as a self-empowering concept, that it's granting of the ability to know who we are, where we are, and to know one's enemy and how to work around them. Again, God in the African flesh challenges the racial narratives about Black inferiority. All right, so let's move on now to political organizing and social activism. So here, I want to look at it in three broad categories, though all three are linked. Institutional, explorative, and repatriational. Now, Rastas did not confine their engagement with Africa to a philosophical and ideological, machination. Their embrace of Africa came to its fullest expression in the need to repatriate. Rastafari taught us that despite our citizenship in the West, we are both exiles. We are both exiles. And thus the Rastaman chants a song, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down and there we wept when we remember Zion, and asked the question, how can we sing Rastafari's song in a strange land? The mission is to trod back to the motherland, to Africa. To trod back. So how does Rastafari engage politically and socially? First, institutional engagement. The formation of the Ethiopian World Federation in 1937 provided the first institutional opportunity for Rastas to engage substantively with the African continent. Haile Selassie directed his personal physician, Dr. Malaku Bayen, to form an incorporated organization to build up support for among the African diaspora during the Italian invasion. By 1939, Local 17 of EWF was organized in Kingston with about 800 people in attendance. And so that was really the hard work of Paul Earlington in 1939. So 1937, EWF established in New York City, but by 1939, about 2 years later, Jamaica had its own chapter. Many members of the Jamaican Rastafari community held island-wide meetings to protest the Italian invasion. They joined the EWF to raise awareness and to raise money to help the cause. And many even petitioned the colonial government to allow them to join the Ethiopian army. So this, this is actually a very, very profound point, that during that period that Rastas would see themselves so thoroughly African, so thoroughly Ethiopian, that they're willing to pledge allegiance in military warfare to help the cause of Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church provided another opportunity for Rastafari to engage with the continent. Though the relationship is sometimes fraught over Rastas' belief in the divinity of Haile Selassie, the church attracted many Rastas in Jamaica and the United States. Rastas saw the church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as authentic Christianity. So of course, I'll tell you about the falsehood of Christianity, but this is authentic Christianity. This is African Christianity. This is original Christianity they would challenge, especially because the church is endorsed by His Imperial Majesty himself. All right, the second element of political organizing and social activism that we can take from Rastafari is what we can term the explorative engagement. The explorative engagement. So one of the major recommendations in the 1960 University Report, so the University Report study done by 3 professors from the University of the West Indies, or University College of the West Indies then, in 1960, at the request of the government of Jamaica, was really to understand who these people are, because up to that point in 1960, Rasta was a constant target of government surveillance, government harassment, government persecution, really. And so the government really wanted to understand who these people are, how can they be helped, and pretty much how they can not have them to be nuisance to the Jamaican society, because that's really what the motive was. Now, the report made a recommendation that the government should sponsor these trips to Africa to help the Rastafari community repatriate. So at least two what they're known as official missions happened. And let's talk about the official mission. So the first one was in 1961, and this one was government sponsored. So the Norman Manley-led government sponsored this trip. And look at this setup. So you had members of the Rastafari community going. So three members going: Fillmore Alvaranga, Mortimo Plano, Douglas Mack. And then you had UNIA representative. You had a representative from the Afro-Caribbean Council, the Afro-West Indian Welfare League, the Ethiopian World Federation. So, and of course you had a representative from the government of Jamaica. Now, they visited Ethiopia, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone on that first trip. So of course they came into New York, they met with people of EWF, and then they went on their way to Ethiopia. So Douglas Mack, incidentally, wrote a book, From Babylon to Rastafari, where he describes kind of getting into Ethiopia. And he said, you know, they had military escort, like these fighter jets came up and escorted them to the airport base in Addis Ababa. So they were given royal welcome. And of course, on that trip, they met with Haile Selassie. They gave gifts, and, you know, they talked about him being divine, his divinity. And of course, the whole matter of relocating to Ethiopia, and just overall topics about the redemption of Black people globally. So after that first mission, two important things happened that will shape what happens in terms of the second mission. One, Jamaica gained independence from Britain August 6, 1962. And so there was a change of government. Norman Manley was no longer premier. It was now Alexander Bustamante. And if you remember from what I mentioned briefly earlier, Bustamante had a fraught relationship with Howell, who was the pioneer in Rasta. He thought Howell was just a dangerous man that should be incarcerated, at least very least institutionalized in a mental, a psychiatric hospital. The second thing happened is a complete breakdown of the relationship. It's known as the Coral Garden Massacre, sometimes referred to as Black Friday, because most of the actual arrests, beating, and killing happened on that Friday, Good Friday. But of course, Rasta said there was nothing good about it, so it's Black Friday. So that happened, and this was under the Bustamante regime. In fact, it is said that Bustamante himself came to Montego Bay, that's the other side of the island, to preside over some of the horrendous acts done to Rastas. So this breakdown in relationship meant that the second mission would not be sponsored by the government of Jamaica. So Bustamante said he would not sponsor it. His government would not sponsor anything like that. And so it was self-sponsored. But the Rastas really told him not to impede their ability to go. So on the second trip, very much scaled down from the first. They visited Nigeria again, this time Kenya, and again Ethiopia. But notice what happened. So it is on the first trip, they invited Selassie to come. They reiterated this invitation on the second trip. And so in April 1966, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie visited Jamaica. Of course, on that same trip, he would go to Haiti and Trinidad. So that was quite an accomplishment. And this, I think, from a historical perspective and something that we can draw on as a model, is a kind of concrete engagement, direct engagement with government. So ideally, a government-to-government interaction would have more potency in terms of really building, whether it's bilateral relationship with Africa through economics or just politics. But again, Rastas have shown that as an organization, as a group of people who are African-minded, who are Africans, who have embraced Africa, who want Africa to be a part of them, and for them to be a part of Africa, can engage the government of these nations. So repatriation initiative, just to back up, really started with the Sashimani land grant that Selassie gave as a thank you gift to Black people in the diaspora, Africans in diaspora, for helping to raise awareness when Italy invaded in 1935. And Rastas repatriated under this land grant fairly early on. And it is a few did go in the 70s when the communist regime took over, but most of the early repatriation happened in the late 50s and early 60s. There is an established Rastafari community today in Sashimani, Ethiopia. Erin McLeod does a beautiful job of describing in her book what the community is like today, some of the challenges that the community is facing, but there's constant work and engagement between the Rastas in Sashimani and the larger Rastafari community in the United States, in England, in the Caribbean, in terms of raising funds to do lots of work. So this is a step further from the early repatriation initiatives, where it's just going and settling, to where there's institution building within the repatriation initiative. So there's schools, clinics, health centers, work programs within this area. And of course, with this repatriation initiative, starting with going to Ethiopia, Sashimani, there's this internationalization of Rastafari. So some of the very places that they've visited in the early missions are now important centers of Rastafari view, way of life, culture, Nigeria, and especially Ghana, and of course, South Africa. So Rastas have branched out to other parts because, again, as I'll talk about some of the challenges to repatriation, it's pretty tough to get citizenship in Ethiopia, almost impossible. So Rastas have gone to other nations, and one of the nations that they've gone to very early on is Tanzania, of course. And so there's a formidable Rastafari community there, and more have gone to Ghana. So of course, I threw in here Ghana's year of return in 2019, which really provided a great opportunity for those who wanted to repatriate to do so. Again, not many Rastas around the world actually seize this opportunity to go. And it's not that they did not want to. There are significant barriers to these repatriation initiatives. More African Americans took on Ghanaian citizenship during the year of return than any other set of people. And that really is about economics and opportunity and ease of travel, because one possesses a United States passport. So there's some pretty much practical concerns to repatriation. But a few did go. There was a delegation from Jamaica that went to some of the year of return events in Ghana. But one of the things under the repatriation initiative is continued talk among Rastas to secure land. So there's really organization happening, or they'll say they're organizing and centralizing. So to secure land in some parts of Africa, at least one organization has looked at securing land in Ghana and sort of like build out a community, get its best and its most skilled members and allies to go and build, set a foundation for others to go. Others have gone to places like Benin to establish schools, but again, language is one of the barriers to repatriation. So the initiatives there, you know, early initiative, just go, set up, adapt, adjust. Later initiatives, build a structure, put in place that structure, and then bring others. So you have a pioneering group will go, and then others will follow. So that's under the repatriation initiative. So repatriation is central to Rastafari organizing an embrace of Africa. Repatriation simply means going back to Africa, going back to one's homeland. Rastas consider themselves exiled, and they have extended this condition of being exiled to all Black people in the Americas. Though born here, though have Western citizenship in the various nations, Rasta consider all of us as Black people who are in the West to be pilgrims and strangers and need to return to Africa. Ideally for Rastas, Ethiopia is the place because again, it is Black Zion. But as one Rastaman told me during my field work 2 years ago, it's like he just wants to reach Africa. He says anywhere he gets on the continent, he will make it to Ethiopia eventually. So here are the challenges to repatriation for Rastas. And by extension, Black people in the West who would like to return to Africa. There are archaic nationality laws that make it hard for Africans in the diaspora to return to Africa. So we're talking about visa restrictions, costs and logistics, and then the inability to become a citizen or even to hold dual citizenship. So those are some real concerns. And then there's the travel cost. The average ticket, say, from South Africa to Jamaica is about $2,800, and from New York, about $1,100. And then you want to throw in hotel cost, and that's if you're going to explore first before anchoring route. So we're not even sure what it is like to purchase land and how much it's going to cost, and if one can even do it depending on which country in Africa. And of course, national boundaries and borders, though the AU has granted that people in the West, Africans in the West, represent the 6th region of the African Union, there's still these logistical challenges. And there are no direct flights from most places in the Americas outside of the US and Canada to Africa. So I know, for example, in Jamaica, there at least one flight from Nigeria, direct flight from Nigeria took place. We don't know what the long-term stability of that is going to be, like if this was just trying out something and it's going to cease. There are concerns about safety, rumored and true, right? And then there's language barrier and perceived cultural difference. But one of the things I appreciate very much of all the horrible things that this pandemic has brought on is that through Zoom, through different technologies, many Africans in the diaspora and Africans on the continent have been able to connect. I've been part of several meetings, several gatherings, virtual gatherings with Rastafari brethren and sistren, both in the West and on the continent, just celebrating. And that opportunity itself is serving to break down some of the apprehensions about going back to Africa, understanding Africa. As I've said oftentimes, that one of the greatest challenges for particularly Jamaicans, because I'm Jamaican, that's my context, is that they have no idea one, where Africa is, and two, what goes on in Africa. So most of what they know about Africa is informed by biased media reporting, informed by rumors that just accrued over the years. So I believe strongly that by even to visit, that was one of the fundamental ways to kind of tie these relationships. So it's not just on a government to government level. That is great. That would work to kind of address some of the issues of our own nationality laws and costs, and provide opportunities for student exchange and that kind of thing. But people to people. Over the summer, the group that started out as a book club, or it was a book study group, now evolved into a movement, had a 10-week kind of series on using Dr. Arikana's book on Wake Up Africa 101 to kind of understand our role and our relationship and our engagement. And I led that group, those talks for the group. And one of the things that came out of that in terms of engagement and repatriation is simply this. Barriers have to be broken down, and these barriers can be broken down successfully by organizing to go. And we've had example of non-Rastas who decide that they're just going to go to Kenya. One gentleman decided that he's going to retire in the United States. He's going to start a nonprofit, and he's going to Kenya, and he's doing wonderful work in Kenya. So again, there are challenges, but they're not insurmountable. And of course, with more fundraising and with just more exposure, I think these connections can be shore up such that they can prompt governments of the region, the Caribbean region, to do more to engage with Africa. So let's now, in the few minutes we have, turn to theory. I've talked a lot about the history. I've talked a lot about kind of some of the actual happenings in terms of Rastafari engagement with Africa. But now I want to offer a theoretical lens to really understand the nature of this engagement. And here I want to turn to the idea of ethical Maroonage. So we know that Maroonage itself as a historical act is our ancestors' flight to freedom. This flight is sometimes transient, lasting only a few hours or even months, and treated by the enslavers as abscondment. And in other cases, a flight to freedom is permanent, resulting in the establishment of maroon communities or sovereign communities. However, underscoring these acts is a desire to assert agency, autonomy, and freedom grounded in our ancestors' flight from the plantation complex. The ideological underpinnings of Maroonage, that is our ancestors' flight to freedom, provides for us a theoretical basis. So it's not just the act, it's a process, it's a theory that allows us to look at our autonomy and our agency and our freedom. Christopher Johnson, in his dissertation, rightly described Maroonage as the act of engaging and disengaging. Taken further, this act is an ideological disengagement from imperial and colonizing epistemes, ideas and structures of knowledge formation, situating ways of being and conduct. So ethical Maroonage then, so Maroonage first is the ideological disengagement, is an ideological disengagement. It's the opting out of an imperial and imperializing society. It is an assertion of autonomy and agency, forming autonomous spaces, autonomous thoughts, autonomous ways of being, sovereign ways of being and consciousness. Ethical Maroonage, at least for Rastafari's ethical Maroonage, is the introduction of transitioning from one state of being to a higher level of existence, rooted in a speech given by Emperor Haile Selassie to the United Nations in 1963 that challenged that we must become members of a new race, overcoming petty prejudice owing our ultimate allegiance not to nations, but to fellow men within the human community. Rastas take from the speech the notion of becoming a new race, Monar, M-O-N-R, which means the establishment of ways of being and conduct in the world that seek to uphold the value of human life, seek to uphold the value of human dignity, Black lives mattering, Black dignity mattering. And so in its widest context as ethical Maroonage, it is walking, it is creating a step, a repatriational step that is grounded in ensuring that all Black people are cared for, that all Black people can assert freedom together, overcoming ideas and challenges of double consciousness, trying to figure out where we are in the world and who we are in the world, to becoming this ethical being, to becoming this independent being, to becoming this free, autonomous, sovereign being. Through ethical Maroonage, Rastas saying, by repatriating, by turning to Africa, by embracing Africa in its fullest and our identity as Africans, we are transitioning the limitations imposed by the colonial order. We're transitioning the limitations of racism, sexism, and all forms of discrimination to embracing a full sovereign African identity. And so by their engagement with Africa, through their philosophical, religious, and spiritual groundings, their social and political organizing, Rastas in Jamaica and around the world provide for us a model of engagement with the continent, a model rooted in understanding that we have to be better than who we are, a model rooted in the understanding that we're becoming members of a new race. This model is, as I see it, and I'm working on it, developing it, is an ethical Maroonage. It is an ideological and complete disengagement from colonial imperial thoughts of Black inferiority to a full embrace of African sovereignty. So I will leave it there and use the rest of our time together to take any comments or questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Goldson. And I think we have some questions in the chat from Leo. Maybe if I unmute, Leo can talk.
I see some of the questions here. Will you read them or can I just jump in?
Yeah, I'm allowing him to. Do you want to go ahead and talk, Leo?
All right, so Dr. Leo asked, Remba asked two general questions and really excellent questions. So why Haile Selassie? Why Haile Selassie? And the second question is, does a common Jamaican feel connected to Africa through the Rastafari movement? Or it's just a way for the civil rights fighters of the time found to distinguish themselves from Europeans? Excellent. So why Haile Selassie? All right, so the short version of that is one, I mean, in 1930, Black people, all right, let me back up. So there is a story that says Marcus Garvey in a gathering, which it wasn't Marcus Garvey who said it, was Reverend Webb who preached it, that look to Africa from whence cometh, or is look to the east from whence cometh a Black king. All right, so that story became popular in the psyche of those who are looking to escape the very tough material and racialized material conditions of Jamaica to hearing that there is this person in Ethiopia who is going to become a king, right? So up to that point, all Jamaicans know, I mean, they'll hear that we were king and queens in Africa, like long, long time ago before slavery, but all they knew were the British monarchy, white monarchy. And so to hear that Selassie become king really affirmed for them a very important point that something is special about this man. Then with the titles of King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, 225th descendant in the Solomonic line, they took this as evidence that he's not only royal, regal, but he's divine. He's divine. And of course, there's language in the Ethiopian, the 1935 Ethiopian constitution, the language is such that it suggests that there is this divine nature about the monarchy. But it's not uncommon for monarchs to talk about themselves in that, that kind of way. So that became part of the discourse and the affirmation that Haile Selassie is indeed God. There's a bunch of other apocryphal stories about Haile Selassie that, performing miracles, doing kind of activities that would, make him kind of like divine, at least from Rastas, divine in their imagination. Now, many Rastas, and that's kind of the unfortunate thing, getting to question number 2, whether many Rastas felt a connection to Africa through, many Jamaicans felt a connection to Africa through the Rastafari movement. I wouldn't say many, because up to, very recent, Rasta was just ridiculed, seen as like misapplying history, not knowing history. It's only in recent times that there's more of a consciousness. And I think this is, this really gained its height during the George Floyd protests last year, where, at least in Jamaica, the Governor General wear a badge. There's the Order of St. Michael with a white angel trampling and a black devil or something like that. And that really had people work up about Blackness and Black consciousness. But largely Jamaica's resisted any kind of Black conscious effort. So, the banning of Dr. Walter Rodney, for example, and kind of the clamping down of books like Black Beauty, and the whole thing of like not allowing Black power to take root in Jamaica as part of like the nation trying to preserve this idea of purity, which is really keeping their fidelity to the British, to Great Britain, the British monarchy, and that kind of stuff. So not many kind of made their connection to Africa through Rastafari, but Rasta has been persistent. They're doing it. They're teaching the nation. I think ultimately, most people who have formed these connections to Africa is probably through reggae music. Which, some people say it's Rastafari music. Well, it's not really. You have lots of Rastas or reggae musicians. Bob Marley, of course, being the most famous, and reggae musicians taking Rastafari themes, but not really. So it's still a lot of work to be done where Africa is concerned. I wish more of our students in college would have the opportunity to go to Africa on student exchange programs. I wish more Rastas in Jamaica would have the opportunity to actually travel to Africa. Many have not. Many don't have that opportunity. So to leave it there, no. Many did not feel connected to Africa through the Rastafari movement. They really kept to either their Jamaicanness or pretty much a European version of that.
Do you want to add anything, Leo? I think I unmuted you.
Oh, really, this was a great presentation, and I knew it was going to be a great presentation anyway. So, and I don't want to be the only person asking questions and interacting with you. But I know that a few countries in the Caribbean requested or applied for membership to the African Union. And I think most of them were denied. And I wonder if a big gesture like that could actually make a difference in terms of Black in the Caribbean and even everywhere in the world being more connected to Africa if Africans themselves welcome them politically in a big organization like the African Union. What is your take on that?
Right. So over the summer, we spent a lot of time, we read Dr. Arikana's, and she was AU ambassador in the US, and we really talked a lot about, kind of this region being the sixth region of the AU and what that actually means and what are the opportunities to participate. So technically, in a technical sense, all these nations in the Caribbean and so on should be able to have associate or affiliate membership in the AU. But I know the AU as a large organization is a lot more complex when you're dealing with so many, even though we have the AU structure dealing with so many governments, it's very complex. But yes, being able from government to government perspective to participate like that would really help to deepen African Caribbean relationships, at least among the populace. The sad reality is that more Jamaicans, and this by extension to most Caribbean folks, feel more connected to the United States than to Africa. And of course, there are logistical reasons to that, like your family would migrate here, so you'll feel, and there's proximity. But I think more can be done at the AU level to really engage these countries, give them membership, more in terms of trade. But again, in the absence of government framework, I think individuals and organizations can engage. Rastas have taught us that they can engage individuals and nations. Our group, for example, now known as the African Sovereign Movement, and I hope the group leader don't get mad at me for talking about this, have planned a trip to Nigeria next year. This is just exploration. We want to talk about explorative, going, seeing what it is, kind of figuring stuff out. And we'll be going on different trips, at least 3, 4 each year to kind of like figure out stuff. And that's a kind of commitment. But of course, government engagement would help a lot, because it will solve lots of the barriers, and the AU is needed here to engage CARICOM, which is our version, as well as individual member states, but also individuals and corporations can do a lot.
Thank you. Florencio?
Thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, Dr. Goldson, and I know it's gonna be getting presentation with a lot of information. And one of the questions one of the points you mentioned just now about some of the Caribbean countries applying to get into EU, and this is just coming to me of new, and it's shocking that why we're trying to prove or preach of oneness, and that is happening at that point in time. But my own question is basically, I think I put it in the chat. I thought I was going to be given the opportunity to speak. So in the context of having from Howard's suggestion, one king, one God, one Zion, one black king, black God, black Zion, and we all understood that literature science started in Alexandria, which is in Africa. So at this point in time, why is it that it's just a suggestion that popped to my mind? I was discussing with some of my peers, and they said, why is it that we have the Bible translated in like 4 different languages in Nigeria itself. So basically the major languages are Yoruba, Hausa, and Igbo. And we have the Bible translating those such languages. So why is it that we don't have textbook? So I also just belong to the school of thought that if we could train our siblings or our young ones, our future tomorrow, in the language, in their mother tongue, I guess learning will be easier. And the way they're going to progress will be way, way faster than which you're going to teach me how to speak in the white man's language first. Then I'm going to start learning science. So you retarded me a little bit. You limited my progress in learning. So as against a young man that is born in this side of the country, that's his mother tongue is English. So that person will have taken way before I learned. Taking that into context. So why is it that those texts, science, are not translated in the local language to make our future tomorrow learn faster and learn better? And I noticed the only major context, I was in a conversation back home in Nigeria. The only context is, okay, fine, they're trying to change the lingual fractal to, which is English, to pidgin English, but that is not enough. But nobody's addressing the fact that which we want to happen. Like looking at the next 10 years, the next 20 years, probably a young man from Western Nigeria, Yoruba, could pick up a physics textbook in Yoruba language and able to, pick out something for himself. So is this movement going to address that? And if we could have English text in Patois, a physics text in Patois, in those mother tongue, learning will be easier, learning will be faster. So in your movement, right? Are you trying to address one of these positions?
All right, excellent point, Brother Fularancho. Excellent point. In the case of Nigeria, there's this book by Dr. Vaughn called Religion and the Making of Nigeria. And he focused on religion, but like it really talks about like nation state formation in Nigeria. So the same is true in Nigeria is true in Jamaica, where, there's a need to outperform the British in everything. And I think maybe in parts of Cameroon, there's a need to outperform the French. But the point is this: nation state formation is a complex thing. How do you keep Nigeria together? How do you ensure there's a Nigeria, right? And one of the thoughts about making sure, especially, after the Northern Protectorate of Nigeria and the South came together as one, how do you make sure that you keep the nation together? Well, one of the ways, craftily devised by the British and wholly endorsed by the founding fathers of Nigeria and founding mothers of Nigeria, is that there should be a common tongue. Right? So is it going to be Igbo? Is it going to be Yoruba? What is it going to be? Of course, it's going to be English, the colonial tongue, right? The tongue, and that poses significant challenges, as you've rightly mentioned, for students learning, because it's not their primary tongue, it's not their mother tongue. It's a second language. It's the same thing is true for me. Like the first thing I learned to speak was Jamaican, right? But and at least a large part of my institution of my learning in schooling up to maybe grade 6 in primary school, teachers would go back and forth between English and Jamaican. But that's just not the case. And you're right. The Bible societies of wherever, if it's the West Indies or International Bible Society, wherever, they will make the effort to translate the Bible into the local dialect, and that's a self-serving purpose, because it's for evangelizing and conversion of people, not necessarily for the edification and learning of people. So another folks would say that, really to compete in a globalized world, maybe the textbooks should not be translated into local languages. but you know, you need to learn English, or French, because those are the languages of trade. But again, someone could say, well, why not learn Mandarin since China is expanding globally? All right, so so you're right about, like, yes, we need to be educated in our mother tongues, not in the colonial tongue, because, you know, and there are studies done at the University of the West Indies that show that students who are instructed in Jamaican learn better than those who are instructed in English, and that's just like a common sense thing. So you asked about my movement. My movement is not at that level, but I'm definitely an advocate for you know, primary instruction in your primary tongue. Not negating or like throwing out that one should learn English as well. And in a more philosophical level, you know, we talk about word sound power in Rastafari, which is pretty much that your language, the language you speak, the language in which you think, has a lot to do with your operation in the world, and that's why Rastas have move beyond just talking in Jamaican or English to talking in their own language, which is focus on I, because in words and sound there is power. All right. So I'll leave that there for Laurentia. We can always talk more about the case of Nigeria, because I know there's a lot more to be said. But you should also petition your president, if he'll listen to you, to see reasoning in that point.
Okay, so there is one question from Isaac in the Q&A section. So even though reggae music is not exclusive to the Rasta music, it has been the most popular vehicle for the spread of the Rastafari message. As reggae's influence gives way to the new style of music in terms of popularity, do you see any other way Rasta ideas are being propagated?
Oh, absolutely. Excellent point, Brother Isaac. Yes, absolutely. No doubt. Reggae music has been the primary vehicle to spread the message of Rastafari globally. There's no doubt about that. I mean, when you think about the formation of Rastafari communities in places like Japan, you know, parts of Asia, it is reggae music. Another way that Rastafari message is being spread is you know, through the embodied form. People see Rasta, you know, a Rasta because there's aesthetics, there's dreadlocks, there's a whole lifestyle, there's a whole kind of aura and sense of movement about them that, you know, attracts the curious person. Also through art, Rastafari art is also popular, and that has helped to spread the message of Rastafari. I know in the modern period, now you know, Rasta is always engaged in like print media, so through lots of books and pamphlets and that kind of stuff, you know, the message spread. I know Rasta communities are all over Facebook, and that's also serving. But Rasta, again, is not an evangelical kind of group of people. There's not an overt effort to evangelize and to convert, make Rastas or others. It's just by the livity. It's just by the way Rastas are that attract. So music, art, the embodied aesthetic form. And movies to an extent.
There is a question in the chat box from Jonathan, who wrote, what do you have to say about Emperor Haile Selassie's brutality to the Oromo and Harari of Ethiopia during his rule?
Wow. All right. So let me put this out there this way. There is no, and I wrote a lot about this in my dissertation. When a person is a political ruler, there is no purity in such a person. Like it's complex, because being a political leader, politics is about power and the assertion of power. And so in the same way, you know, that to establish the Nigerian nation state, the Ethiopian nation state was established. It was established too through violence. I mean, Ethiopia was never set up, if you look at the history of Ethiopia, where you had one person being dominant or being the leader over everyone. It was always parochial, regional, it's more like less feudal. And so, you know, like Selassie's descendants, you know, they led one area of Ethiopia, one people of what is known as Ethiopia. And so, you know, that was kind of the arrangement. So once there was centralization of power, resistance was brutally, you know, any resistance was met with brute force. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. But that's, you know, kind of the way in which these nation state formations really work. I mean, people don't just give up their power and pay taxes and give contributions to the centralized monarchy sitting at a seat of power in Addis Ababa. And we've seen with the Oromo uprising last year, some of the consequences stemming from the history of those who have felt oppressed. I know that in London, for example, there was like kind of the turning over of a statue of, or at least a defacing of it, of a statue of Haile Selassie. So political leaders are complex. So even though from the Rastafari perspective, we're projecting him, you know, as God in the flesh, I mean, he was a political leader and a long-serving political leader. You know, of course, before his coronation in 1930, he has pretty much seized power as co-regent and exercised dominance in the world stage since the 1920s up to 1974 when the Dirge took him out of power. So he was a long-serving leader, and so of course there are these dark spots in his tenure. In as much as there are great, you know, great things that he's done in terms of education and medicine and kind of like modernizing Ethiopia fairly early on. So what I would say about that, to cut it short, is that, you know, as a complex person and political leader, yes, there are these dark marks on his tenure.
Okay. Johnson has a question. Generally speaking, does the Jamaican population identify with Africa, or is it a section of the population, for instance, the intellectuals like Dr. Randy?
Hey, oh, okay, so, all right. That's a good question. You know, there are two parts to it. In the scholarly literature, there's always this idea of, you know, the peasant class that's associated with the Afro-conscious class. And I think somewhere, if I didn't do it, it's an oversight, where Barry Chavans referred to this worldview that structured Rastafari as revivalism. And so that's the strongest African retentive part. But sadly, at least more and more, and of course academics are part of the change agents in society, putting into people's minds and mouth ideas and words to really think about themselves. You know, more using Afro-Jamaican. Some people think there's no place to talk about Afro-Jamaican, it's just Jamaican. And they will tell you we don't have racism in Jamaica, so we don't need to make these demarcation between Afro-Jamaican, Chinese Jamaican, Indian Jamaican. We're this melting pot of culture and races and all that stuff. So I don't think many would identify themselves as African per se, but all is conscious that their ancestors are from Africa. And this is where we have the gap between my ancestors from Africa, that's kind of my heritage, and today I stand as Jamaican, that's a gap. And I think part of what Rastafari has been doing is to bridge that gap. Part of what people like myself, the so-called intellectuals, are doing is to bridge that gap by helping people to really understand that you're African first. You're African first. You're Jamaican secondarily. Even though you're born in Jamaica, you're African first. That's your root. And Marcus Garvey has tried to do this for even before Rasta came on the scene. Africa for the Africans. But it's still a struggle. We're working on it. It's still a struggle. So that's it generally.
Thank you very much. I think there is one more question in the Q&A section, if you have some. So please shed some light on the Rastafarian movement and the Momo of Kenya. I don't know if you want to do that or.
Oh, okay. So part of it is said that part of the inspiration for dreadlocks in Rastafari is that was inspired by the Moi Moi uprisings in Kenya, and that pictures of the Moi Moi of freedom fighters pretty much inspired, you know, and I have a picture on my computer. This matted hairstyle. And so Rastas, what they've done, I mentioned earlier about history of resistance in Jamaica, but it's not just Jamaica, I should have said history of resistance among Africans, that Rastas pull in to their own worldview and their own system and the struggle for resistance, all Black resistance going as far back as you can. You want to go to the Haitian Revolution, to Moi Moi uprising, like, so that those serve as inspiration, as examples of Black people resisting and Black people overthrowing the oppressor. So that's part of the inspiration in the Rastafari movement and Moi Moi uprisings. And just there's a quick comment from Dr. Tristan Samuels, really emphasizing the need for African and Afro-Caribbean translation work. And I think that gets to Fullerancho's concern of an Igbo grammar in Jamaican would be wicked. And since you're a linguist among us, Dr. Samuels, why not throw that out as a challenge to you to work on, you know, Igbo grammar in Jamaican? You know, most Jamaicans like to identify that our ancestors primarily came from Ghana, and we're Ashantis, but I think in reality, at least based on the ELTIS database, that more of our people came from the Blight of Benin. So we should identify more with Nigeria than Ghana, but you know, I say Africa all over, particularly West Africa. So again, lots of work need to be done in terms of bridging these relationships. And I think we have, you know, Rastafari has shown us a model. We can build on that, we can expand that. It's in education, just teaching, you know, I didn't learn African history in high school. I'm sorry to say that. I went to a very prominent high school in Jamaica, never learned African history. Not an iota African history. All I learned is that they brought here slaves, some became Maroons, and we have revival and Pocaminia, and we dance and we jump, the performatives, as to borrow Tristan term, the zoo gazing. That's all we ended up with. So we never had African history, and Walter Rodney challenged us that we need to marshal African history as part of our intellectual vigilance and resistance. So just like teaching, and I've talked about this with my group in the summer, you know, doing an illustrated storybook of African history for kids, for young kids. I'm not talented in that area. I know the history, I could write the history, but if I have it illustrated, that would be beautiful. So we need, you know, more than what they show in Jamaica, Roots on TV during Black History Month, unfortunately. So again, a lot of work needed to be done. I'm hoping at some point, you know, to even start a nonprofit that will sponsor and help to sponsor trips to the continent for many people in Jamaica who would like to go but don't have the resources to go. So, you know, lots of work, lots of opportunity. And again, over the summer, I made a presentation that, look, these are the major developments on the financial end in Africa. We always talk about the economics. As I look at Mozambique and energy, Mozambique is poised to become like an energy hub. Of course, it's a company from Netherlands that it's down there, kind of building out infrastructure. So what about other folks, Black people, countries in the Caribbean, other parts of Africa? So there are lots of opportunities on the continent for fiscal engagement. But you know, for me, it's not just money. It's not just money. That's why I stick to the Rastas. It's like embrace, appreciation, understanding yourself, because that's how we win the warfare. You have to understand yourself, that you're African, first, and whatever nationality you have by virtue of, you know, citizenship, that's secondary. So again, I thank you all so much for your generous time and for your engaging questions. Thank you, Dr. Leo. Thank you, Dr. Saar, for the invitation. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goldson. We are out of time, but we appreciate your coming and sharing with us. Thank you, everybody who came today. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Great presentation. Bye-bye.